Hello everyone, I'm Rajat Ubhaykar, and today we are going to be talking about a subject you probably never thought about, but without which the comfortable lives you lead would not have been possible. Right from the food you eat, to the clothes you wear, to the latest Amazon delivery package you just got delivered. Everything is dependent on one community of men who ensures that goods land up from one state to another, that India is linked together as an economically integrated unit. Yes, today we are going to be talking about truck drivers. Now you may ask, what got me interested in the lives of drivers? Nobody I knew was a truck driver or involved in the transportation industry. As a middle class kid raised in Mumbai, I harbored the usual ambitions. I studied for IIT, later for UPSC. But there was one incident in my life that really piqued my curiosity about the lives of truckers. As a student at IIT Kanpur, I remember setting out on an adventurous trip with my friends, as is often the case when we are teenagers. After a series of misadventures, we found ourselves stranded on a highway near Shimla. It was the dead of the night. The January chill was setting in, and we realized there was not a single vehicle who was willing to take us on to drop us near our lodge. Finally, when we had almost given up, one truck driver stopped. He was barely out of his teens, a young boy. When we got in, we found 90s Bollywood music playing on the stereo. We didn't speak much during the journey, but when he dropped us, I offered him some money as his well deserved due. To my surprise, he firmly refused, pushed my hand away, and said, Raste mein hi tha. I was taken aback. It was the first time in my life that anyone had ever refused money. I was really intrigued. After going back to Kanpur, I remember scouring the internet for an article or a book about the lives of truckers, only to come up empty handed. I remember thinking, how is it possible that 70 years after independence, close to nothing had been written about the drivers who are the backbone of our economy, who are the arteries of our nation, ferrying goods from one part to another. This led me to take on a journey of my own to write the book I wanted to read. Thus, I found myself setting out on a 10,000-kilometer long journey over a period of 6 months. I traveled to over 20 states, mostly everywhere except for parts of Chhattisgarh and parts of the Northeast. It took me from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Imphal to Gujarat, and I had the time of my life really. I met many interesting characters. I would often stand on the road hitchhiking trying to find someone amenable to the idea of taking me along. Sometimes I would go to dhabas or petrol pumps and try to convince someone to take me on, some truck driver. Usually, after 15 or 20 minutes of effort, someone would agree. Thus, I met many interesting people. The very first driver I traveled with was from Kangra, Himachal Pradesh. As I spoke to him and as I traveled with him, I found that his taste in music was most excellent. Right from old songs by Lata Mangeshkar, Kishore Kumar, to the latest Bollywood numbers, Punjabi ghazals, he covered the entire gamut. Later I asked him, what made you drive, what made you become a trucker? He told me that as a child in Kangra, he would go on long truck trips with his cousins who would play the most fantastic music. Those are some of the most fond memories he had, and he wanted to ensure that he could live those memories all his life. Driving to strange places, listening to his favorite music. The very first driver thus I met became a truck driver because he loved music. That was not something I had expected at all. Later, I also discovered some relatively more darker things. For instance, while traveling in Punjab, I found the opium crisis that is affecting many truckers. Many of them are addicted to a substance called bhukki, which is a dried poppy husk. It is a relatively cheap intoxicant, but it is highly addictive. Withdrawal symptoms are brutal. It's very difficult to beat the habit, and I found that many truckers in Punjab were victims of this addiction. Later, when traveling in the Northeast, I discovered how the insurgency is affecting routine transportation of goods in that part of the country, in Nagaland and Manipur. I found out that Uh, Trucks carrying food and fuel were escorted by 200 strong, they were taken in 200 strong convoys escorted by paramilitary vehicles because traveling alone was not safe. Insurgent groups were openly extracting taxes, unofficial taxes on the highway. And it was a common sight for many truck drivers to be parked in petrol pumps somewhere so that they could hunch together, they could huddle together and travel as a group instead of traveling alone. Many outsiders felt very unsafe in those areas, especially truck drivers who travel in the dead of the night on highways. Also, at the same time, I found the kind of resourcefulness that many truck drivers employed to escape such unofficial taxation and extortion on the highways. Some of them would often evade legitimate taxes too by adopting kacha rastas, which are the relatively rural roads where the tax checkpoints and so on are not set up. Others had cultivated informants in the local RTOs, where they would try to find out where the RTO officials had set up checkpoints so that they could evade them and give them the slip. So, within the RTO system itself, many drivers would be informants of the truckers who would then plan their trip accordingly. Also, one of the darker things I found was the ubiquity of child labor that exists on Indian highways, the army of chotus that are employed in Indian dhabas everywhere, almost everywhere I went. It is a sobering realization of how far we need to come as a nation to ensure lives of dignity to our children who are a future resource. And there is no better place than highways to understand how bad conditions often are for them. At the same time, I found some very interesting things, one of them being truck art. I didn't realize that building a truck was not just a matter of the truck coming out of the factory. What comes out of the factory is a mere chassis, which is the bare bones engine and meta structure, which is the basic core of the vehicle. The rest of the designs and the wooden designs that we see are built in workshops by around 15 to 20 types of artisans, specialized artisans, who one of them could be a welder, other would be a painter, another would be a radium tape maker, another would be a truck artist. And truck art is something I realized it has remarkable consistency over the country. Everywhere, truck art is similar and they follow an aesthetic motifs and aesthetic conventions that are somehow united. This I realized as I researched more is because of the history of transport itself in India. The traditional communities of Banjaras who were responsible for long distance transport in India would often decorate their animals, their pack animals like bullocks, in very similar ways, with tassels hanging down their ears and their hairs would be braided. And these motifs are something which we find recurring in truck art today. So some of the most fascinating things that I found out was truck art, and the major centers of truck art in India include Punjab, with Sirhind, the town of Sirhind in Punjab, the town of Namakkal in Tamil Nadu, Vijayawada in Andhra Pradesh, Indore in Madhya Pradesh, and there are thousands of such artists who churn out trucks on a daily basis. It takes up to a month to build a truck, and often the drivers themselves stay back to supervise the build construction of the truck, because for them the truck is not just a vehicle, it is their home. It is where they spend 8 months of the year trying to earn a living on the highways of India. So for them it is very important to ensure that the truck is built according to their specifications and customizations. So these are some of the more fascinating things I found out. But at the same time, one of the shocking things that I found was that 15,000 truck drivers die every year in accidents in India. 15,000. Can you imagine that number? Can you imagine a more lethal profession? And as I found this, I wanted to understand, why does this happen? What has led to the level of road safety in India that 15,000 truck drivers have to die in the course of in the line of duty, because that is what they are doing. They are transporting goods, and it is a duty that they are doing for the nation in many ways. Now you may assume, isn't that because most drivers are drunk at the wheel? Isn't it because they are rash drivers who do not care about pedestrians and smaller vehicles? That is the general perception we hold, right? But when I was traveling, I realized that most truck drivers are very conscious of the fact that drunk driving poses a risk to their lives and could very well result in their death. They told me, हमें भी अपने जान की परवाह है. We are not stupid. हमें भी अपने जान की परवाह है. And I barely saw any truck driver drinking on the job. And that is something I wish to put out there. Because one of the prominent myths about drivers is that everybody is drunk while they are driving on the road. That is not true. In fact, what I discovered was that the world appears very different from the cabin of a truck. When you're in the cabin of a truck, it is the smaller vehicles, the motorcycles, and the smaller cars who appear much, much rasher because they are trying to impatiently overtake the trucks. They are trying to impatiently maneuver without warning around the trucks, and they don't realize how heavy and loaded these trucks are and how difficult it is to control them. And it almost seems like they have a death wish, almost on a suicidal mission, so impatient they are. And that is when I realized that truck drivers have an unfair rap for being rash drivers, considering that most of the time the loads that they carry ensures that they cannot drive beyond say 40 or 50 kilometers. So it is very very unlikely that they will be indulging in rash driving everywhere. So that is another thing I want to clarify, that it's most of them, since they are regular drivers, they've been driving for years. They show extraordinary patience towards the smaller vehicles. In fact, they allow them to let go. They often stop for hitchhikers like me, and they are the most good-hearted people I've encountered on highways. Frankly, never did a car ever stop for me on the highway. It is always the truck driver who did. And another thing I realized, why there are so many accidents, why so many truck drivers die, is their abysmal working conditions. Since they work in the informal sector, there's barely any regulation, barely any sense of humanity in their lives. They sleep in the trucks for barely 2 3 hours. They drive for 16 hours a day, often more than that, just to get the maal on time, because they earn an inam for every time they deliver a load on time. The inam is barely 3 to 5 thousand rupees, but they risk their lives for it. This leads to sleep deprivation, and in my opinion, sleep deprivation is the biggest cause of deaths in India, especially road safety related deaths among truck drivers. There were so many incidents while I was traveling when I found out that the truck driver who was in our convoy, in our retinue, was barely saved from crashing into a ravine, into a valley, because he had fallen asleep at the wheel. Another, mostly I found that drivers, because they are under such immense pressure, would finally go to sleep only when they found themselves dozing at the wheel. And this, in my opinion, is the biggest uh, cause of deaths among drivers. Now, at this point, it is also important to understand the larger structure of the transportation industry, which creates these conditions. Firstly, 75% of the trucks in India are owned by owners who own less than five trucks. So it is an extremely fragmented industry. Uh, this means that since it is very, very fragmented, truck drivers are unable to mobilize together or unionize together to demand better working conditions. They are always divided along lines of ownership and also along often lines of language, region, and so on. This ensures that their working conditions remain as they are. Another thing to understand about the structure of the industry is it is marked by a high level of intermediation. What I mean by that is transporting goods in India is not just the simple matter of a consignor, just calling up a driver and saying I want to send some mal. There are two intermediaries involved between them, which means that 25 to 30% of the total proceeds goes to these intermediaries, which means lower wages for the truck drivers, which means they take greater risks to travel long distances in short times as possible so that they can earn inams or incentives. So these are some of the broad structural factors which leads to this particular condition. Another big reason why there are so many accidents is overloading. Now you may assume that overloading is the simple is not really a big deal. But the fact of the matter is that overloading reduces the braking capacity of trucks by more than 30%, which means they cannot control the momentum of their truck when the need arises. I barely survived one collision when I was traveling in an overloaded truck. I realized that the momentum is so much that drivers simply cannot brake on time. However, in spite of all these difficulties they face their working conditions, I found many of them very cheerful and optimistic about their future. Some of them wanted to ensure their kids get an English language education, become Sarkari officers. Others wanted to become bus drivers and were using the truck driving as experience and practice for their bus driving test. Many of them were very, very dildar, for whom money comes and goes. And most of the times, in fact, almost all the time, they refused to accept any money for me for hitchhiking. They would often even refuse, not allow me to pay anything, even at the dhabas where we stopped for food or chai. Such was the generosity I saw, even in such dire circumstances, in such difficult circumstances that they lead their lives. However, one thing they were united by is the frustration, sense of frustration and despondency at the lack of respect they enjoy in society. Some truckers told me, "Why do people think truck drivers are bad people? I mean, we travel such long distances, carrying your goods, tolerating the blows of gundas, taking on such risks. Still, we are considered bad people. If anyone tells you that we are bad people, ask them to come and live with us for a week. Then I will ask them, why are we bad people?" And this was not, but however, this was not always the case. In the 1980s and before that, truck driving was a relatively respected profession, much like crane or forklift operators today. Truck driving was a relatively skilled job that required physical endurance as well as skills to navigate such a huge vehicle. What really changed things was the advent of power steering as a technology. This made driving trucks easier, and almost overnight it made it an unskilled job from a skilled job. This reduced the wages of the truck drivers, resulting in stagnation of wages and reducing the unattractiveness of the profession at large. This means today that, since they have to spend so much time away from their families, they have to face so much harassment, extortion, because of the dangerous working conditions. 85% of truck drivers say that they won't recommend truck driving as a profession to their family members or friends. However, at the same time, I would like to say that uh, traveling across India, hitchhiking across India, exposed me to so many interesting people, so many interesting facets of India. And I would highly recommend that one interacts with people outside their socio-economic class. One often finds that talking to our people from our same class, we are often discussing the latest Netflix show or other such mundane things. We don't really get to understand how different experiences means that people have such different insights into life and into the world in general. This is what hitchhiking has taught me the most. It has taught me that India is such a vast and diverse place, full of interesting people, full of interesting facts. And for me, actually, India is a tapestry. It's like a matryoshka doll, and every region, every state is almost like an entire country with sub-regions, different cuisines, dialects. And I mean, if it were up to me, I would travel to every state, explore it in as much detail as possible, and write about it. Such is the scope of travel writing in India as a profession. And it's not just limited to truckers. There are so many nomadic communities, so many people in the informal sector about whom little is known, about whom little is ever written, because the mainstream media, the media in general, focuses on the formal sector and on big developments, big events. But the daily lives of the ordinary people, this goes unrecorded, and this is something that travel writing can really contribute to. Lastly, I would like to, I hope that at the end of this talk, the next time when you encounter a trucker being frustratingly slow on the highway, I hope you won't curse him. I hope you will realize the kind of difficult lives they lead, and how much effort they put, how much sacrifice they make to ensure that goods land up on our tables, food lands up on our table, goods land up in warehouses. And India goes on because of truckers. And as the dialogue from Irishman goes, if you got it, a truck brought it. Thank you.